People's Platform.
Good evening and welcome to the People's Platform. I'm Niresh Eliothambi. My guest tonight is Jayantha Wijesinghe, well-known conservationist and convener of the Rainforest Protectors. Welcome, Jayantha.
Thank you so much, Niresh. Thank you so much for Newsfirst inviting on the People's Platform to discuss the very important topic of environmental conservation and current affairs.
Right. So let's get the ball rolling. Jayantha, governments in this country have this habit of sneaking laws in through the back door. We've seen this happening over the past couple of years with various areas,
Yes.
whether it's terrorism, human rights, people's freedom of expression, and so on. And just last week we had another example where the age of consent was suddenly to be lowered down to, I believe, 14 years without any sort of discussion with society. And now, fortunately, that has been rethought and withdrawn for now. Now, with the environment, it's pretty much the same, isn't it? There are laws which suddenly are sneaked in. We've had previous governments which did that. And what's the situation now with this government and the environment?
Very true in terms of some of these legal changes or the amendments to Act and new circulars, gazettes and various provisions being changed without public consultation is happening even in terms of environment. Now, if you look at the past, like when, especially in terms of conserving our forest conservation. There was a significant progressive steps that were taken over decades in the past, and since 2020 especially, we see everything being reversed slowly, and that is done at a rate and in a very shrewd way without people having time, as you very correctly said, to understand what's going on. For instance, I can briefly tell you, for the interest of time, in the first part of 2020, there was a gazette put forward in order to release the forest lands in protected areas, even if people have occupied them for a certain period of time, without any environmental considerations, without any environmental impact assessment being done, or any thought given to what the consequences could be if lands in the protected areas are released. And when that failed, and that gazette was eventually reversed, and then they come up with 2020 a circular. Now you have a gazette, and then on top of that, when it didn't work, you come up with a circular. And on that circular, they suggested that the same thing, the lands that people occupied, supposedly these are the businessmen or the companies, or for that matter, it could be individuals who have illegally, by illicit means, occupying the forest lands. This 2020 circular suggested the same thing. And based on that, there were 4 or 5 different circulars issued in order to release this land. So this was a trend that we find, that there are different pieces of legislations, different pieces of policies that the government comes up in an ad hoc way, confusing people, confusing the conservation community, and changing things without us realizing. Now, when all of that didn't work because of the public pressure, later on, 3 years down the line, in the month of February, in the year of 2023, they came up with a cabinet decision for the same purpose. Now you have cabinet decisions, lot of things going on. So in summary, when it comes to environmental conservation, there is so much happening that we can't even keep a track of. And unfortunately, they are not for conservation per se, but they are to exploit the forest resources and other environmental resources.
Now, Jayantha, we are living in a nation where the government is bankrupt.
Yes.
Financially. Let's not go into the other areas it may be bankrupt, but certainly financially.
Yes.
And it is divesting state-owned enterprises and trying to bring in foreign investment. There is some interest among various companies, Indian, Chinese, and so on. And doesn't it become even more vital that we ensure that we have the laws in place to protect our country and the environment, our forests, mining, our fisheries, our coastlines, all that.
It is very vital, because if you look at, if a country is bankrupt, we know, we have seen many countries going through different economic downturns, recessions, and many different conflicts in terms of ethnic conflicts, even for that matter, and economic downturns, so on and so forth. Any country going through these can recover easily. But if you take countries that have gone bankrupt in terms of environmental resources, cannot revive it back. They cannot revive it back unless you're like probably Saudi Arabia, and even for a country like that, it's so costly for them to try and bring back even 1% of what we have in this country. So therefore, on that backdrop, going bankrupt and trying to do many things is we should be able to do something about it. I mean, I'm not saying that, I'm not justifying in any way that a country going bankrupt can be excusable or should be excused with all what we have in this country, from tea to tourism to apparel industry to IT industry to a lot of other things. But if you look at when a country is trying to attract foreign investment, foreign direct investments, or any project based economic vision, I would say, you need to look at what need to be preserved first, and you need to look at basic requirements of a country in terms of environmental resources for us to live. Where does our air pollution can be maintained, or the air optimum air quality level can be maintained? How can we provide fresh drinking water? How can we make sure that there is enough water for agriculture? And we need to look at all of these things before looking at enabling investments. This was clearly said. If you look at some of these, funny enough, but Gama Samaga Pelisandaras, there were many times that the former president stressed the fact that we have to first identify the areas, no-go zones, for instance, areas that need to be preserved, and when that is identified, only you can push in investments. But what happened? Did he do that? Did he try to demarcate what areas we need to preserve, what forest resources we should have, what is our optimum forest cover that we need to maintain? We are not looking at it. We are just talking about it. Even the current president, he speaks of developing country in terms of climate, his climate prosperity plan by 2048, in terms of maintaining a 39% of a forest cover. If the document is true and is factual, and if it's intended to do what it does, it is supposed to do, how can we have a 39% of forest cover when we only have 17% of a forest cover right now? That is simply not enough. So what you very correctly said is very important. When we look at investments, we need to first make sure there are very environmental resources that keeps us going. As opposed to some of the similar countries that are having major issues because their environment is not as good as ours. Because ours, if you put a seed on the ground, it is going to give you fruit. So yes, very true. We need to look at our resources, make sure that they are protected. If the laws and regulations are not enough, make those regulations, and then get all these investments and use these resources.
But our political leaders, including presidents and ministers, they talk the talk, but
yes,
they don't always walk the talk.
Definitely,
for example, yes, one of our former presidents who spoke about the environment a lot,
yes,
then went and handed over or tried to hand over the other state forest category,
yes,
to the local government entities.
Yes.
Which obviously local government entities are not particularly focused on the environment.
Definitely.
They are more into running of the local government infrastructure.
Yes.
So this could have become a disaster.
It would have, definitely. And local governments are also politically manipulatable more than the central government or whatever. Now, the other state forests that belong to the forest department were almost transferred to the divisional secretariats and other government agents to be utilized within land development ordinance. That could have been almost 800,000 hectares of forests giving out, so that politicians and bureaucrats working with politicians could give these lands freely for people who are interested. Now I can talk about some of these lands, how these lands are used. You know the famous Rajanganayaya, almost 100,000 of lands to be given to a company to plant aloe vera. Now there is 60,000 acres of lands in Bibile Monaraga, Lakirian Kumra and Dehegama to be given to a company called Gasel Ventures. It's a Singaporean American company as far as I know, for sugarcane plantations. And if you look at Ampara, there is another 60,000 acres of lands to be given for sugarcane. Now the problem is that right now our sugar production is just 8%. Even if we utilize all our forest resources that are there in terms of other state forests, we still can't produce the amount of sugar that we need for the country. So there are certain things that you can't practically produce. And then there was a plan to produce maize in terms of corn countrywide, so that we can make sufficient in terms of corn for the animal feed, etc. Now, if you look at 2 years, 3 years down the line, all of these lands were given to some of these famous companies from many different parts. How much of corn are we producing? Where are those lands? Who owns these lands now? These lands are owned by very few individuals, very known individuals connected to politicians today.
And as always, when you do mention names, since those companies don't have a representative on the show, it is, of course, you who are responsible for that.
Yes.
Of course.
Thank you so much.
You are an expert in conservation. So now I was talking about politicians and whether they walk the talk. Now we have a president who repeatedly emphasizes climate change and the global need to battle it. He does so at many international fora.
Yes.
And it's quite impressive.
Yes.
For a country such as ours to be speaking about such an important matter. And he has mooted very seriously the idea of a climate change university.
Yes.
Which I haven't heard from any other country. And gone so far as to allocate, I think, 1 billion rupees from the budget.
Yes,
so that's quite serious. But at the same time, is the country serious about climate change, about conservation? Is the rest of the government serious about it? What's the point of launching a climate change university if your ministers are not acting in the best interests of conservation?
The best answer I can give you is that if you look at President's appointments for environmental bodies, the Ministry of Environment, when Keheliya Rambukwala did not have a ministry, or he had to leave the Ministry of Health, he was appointed to the Ministry of Environment. How serious are you in terms of your appointments in terms of environmental conservation reflects whether you are truly interested in conservation. Now, if you look at Minister of Forest and Wildlife, if you look at Minister of Marine Resources, we can understand if these people are truly committed. And then you look at the appointments in terms of chairmen and directors and other positions at the Central Environmental Authority, Marine Environmental Protection Agency, and then the Forest Department to Wildlife Department to all of these departments. If you look at the appointments itself, that's a reflection of whether you are truly committed or not. Speaking about the president's interest and his speeches, now if you look at the most recent COP, Conference of Parties in Dubai, that we had a separate platform for ourselves, and President was speaking about a new concept called the tropical belt, that the impacts of the tropical belt in terms of climate change and all that. These are very interesting. From the surface looks like very innovative and very committed. But if you really look at the ground situation, from the appointments of ministers to the officials, that we find there is a big mismatch. And also in terms of the execution. Now if you look at, now there is a Reforestation Act that's been drafted, and the Presidential Secretariat is speaking highly of it. But if you look at the last budget, only 100 million rupees was allocated for reforestation entirely. What can you do with 100 million rupees? We need to reforest 3% of our forest cover. We need to increase our forest cover by 3%, and that is only possible by way of reforestation. But if you are only allocating 100 million rupees, I don't think that's walking the talk.
Food for thought indeed. We'll take a short break and we'll be right back.
The People's Platform.
The most awaited Alun Arthur celebrations. Well, Wire, be ready.
Sri Lanka's precious world heritage.
Shakti TV every Saturday and Sunday at 8:30 p.m.
TV1. TV for life.
Presidential election before the 17th of October, says UNP chairman. Former election chief says presidential poll cannot be delayed, warns he would take to the street if such an attempt is made. Police obstruct People Struggle protest in Kalutara. India's G20 presidency on digital public infrastructure purposes, One Future Alliance. Will the central bank governor step down?
TV1. TV for life. The People's Platform.
Welcome back. We're speaking with conservationist Jayantha Wijesinghe. Jayantha, now you just mentioned that in the budget there was just 100 million rupees allocated for reforestation.
Yes.
I know our government doesn't have much money.
Yes.
That's why the country is in this mess.
Yeah.
But what's the point of 100 million rupees?
Well, when you also say that the government does not have enough money, are just waste of money. If you don't invest enough on the environment, in my opinion, I think there is no better place to invest other than invest in environment, because that's what's going to keep us going, our agriculture going, our water cycle going, and provision of basic environmental services for people going. You can't live more than 2 to 3 minutes without clean air. What if we become like India, where almost about 300,000 people die out of bad air pollution? What if we become like China, where 1 million people die because of bad air pollution? What if we become an African country that so much of kids die just because of not having clean water? So this is an investment for future. So I don't think that we don't have enough money, because if you look at some of the national parks in the country, just for 3 months, if you look at 3 months income during a season of one particular national park itself, much more than what we are speaking here. So it's in terms of a share, I believe this reflects the negligence more than not having money. But just to finally tell you that there may be many other innovative ways that the government can work with, because there is so much of international funding that can come if the government is serious, and there is so much of other programs, there is so much of other donor agencies that the government can work with, instead of working on things that may not be urgent, but also looking at environmental conservation.
So it's a matter of setting priorities, isn't it?
Very true, very true.
In the sense now, we see this same situation with the health sector, where the budget is relatively small.
Yes.
And the education sector, again, it's very small.
Yes.
But our defense budget continues to be rather large.
Yes.
And grows as well.
Exactly.
So it's the same sort of issue we are facing with the environment, isn't it?
Very true. Now, if you look at very valid point that you brought in, I think more than 15% of our budget goes for defense, and more than I think roughly around 45% of all government salaries are for military and other defense services. I'm not saying it's not important, but if you look at a country like Costa Rica, for instance, they did this decades ago, that they realized that their money, the amount of money that they invest in their military and other infrastructure should be, part of it should be invested back in the environment. Now, as a result of that, Costa Rica saw the highest increase of tourism growth in terms of ecotourism. Now, we are speaking of tourism growth. Now, we all know that we were having more than $300 million US coming, I guess, for a month in this year so far. And if you are looking at reviving the country and bringing in more tourism revenue, there is no better place to invest than in environment, and that is going to give us returns. Not just invest in something without any returns, but invest in something that's going to give you great results, great returns that can be later on invested in the environment and many other sectors.
Now, you spoke of the massive manpower which is within our military establishment.
Yes.
But all told, I think there's something like 1.5 million people working in government.
Yes.
And most departments, or many departments and ministries and corporations, are highly overstaffed.
Yes.
Many ministers say so.
Yes.
To sometimes where there should be one person, there are 10 people.
Yes.
Now, unfortunately, when it comes to the environment, conservation, if you take the wildlife department or the forest department, we are often told that they don't have enough manpower.
Very true.
What's going on there?
Now, that's a very interesting point, which I was also thinking about when I was speaking about this, having so many staff on other entities and agencies. Wildlife department and forest department and central environmental, the major complaint they have when public comes, even when we come up with with some issue, that they say that they don't have their vehicles, they don't have manpower. But if you really look at how these resources, even what is available right now within these departments, could be optimized, used optimally, we could do better, because our head officers, if you go to wildlife head office, if you go to forest department head office, if you go to central environmental authority head office, big offices with so many people, hundreds of people, and doing almost nothing in most cases. I'm not saying that there are people who are working hard, but there are sections and departments that does not work that much. There is not much of work. But if you look at the field officers, there is not many people. But there is a more innovative, better solution. The solution we are suggesting, we are not only talking about problem. We can get the forest department and at least wildlife department combined together, so that both staff can manage one protected area. Right now, if there is an issue about an animal, we need to go to the wildlife department. A problem about a protected area, we need to go to the forest department. But if you go to the forest department about an issue of an elephant in a protected area, then the wildlife department has to come to the picture. Why does it have to be so? We have the Forest Conservation Ordinance, Flora and Fauna Protection Ordinance. Both should be, the officers of the both departments should be able to execute, enforce both laws. That way, this manpower problem could be solved.
But also, right now, we have had situations where the Forest Department and the Wildlife Department are at loggerheads.
Yes.
And they even filed cases against each other.
Yes. Now that is even more ironic, because if you look at now, you have a problem, you don't have enough resources. Now you're fighting for the same protected area about a boundary. Forest Department and Wildlife Department, and then when we go and complain the Forest Department about a forest destruction, they say, okay, this is not yet demarcated as a protected area, go and tell that to the Central Environmental Authority. It doesn't have to be. They should be able to look at the National Environment Act. They should be able to enforce law in terms of National Environment Act also. Now these are the little legal remedies and institutional remedies that could address the problem of capacity or the human manpower, and again, like you mentioned, having to fight each other and not working together in tandem, instead trying to fight between among these agencies for the same purpose is very saddening, to say the least.
Now let me go back to this mooted climate change university.
Yes.
Seems like a wonderful idea.
Yes.
But setting up any kind of university anywhere in the world is a massive undertaking. You are not opening a preschool. It's something which is very serious.
Yes.
You need the infrastructure. You need the land.
Yes.
You need administrators who know how to administer a university, and you need experts in that particular field.
Yes.
If it's an engineering university, you need expert engineers and lecturers in engineering. Same with medicine.
Yes.
Now, in this area of climate change, do we have such human resources?
Well, I do believe Sri Lanka has a lot of human resources in terms of climate change. I know a lot of people who study overseas, they go overseas to study climate change, and also there are a lot of experts who are working outside of the country on climate change, lot of areas. So it is more than resource issue, and we are able to get the resources. If it's academia, we can get the entire world to come in. I think as a concept it's a good idea. We can get a lot of foreign students coming and working with studying here, so it could be educational tourism also. It's a good idea, but we need to be committed and show that we are truly caring, we are truly honest about promoting climate change, climate science, and acting on climate change and delivering sustainable development goals. So finally, what I would say is that we need to be serious and don't use climate change university as a cover to continue to deny climate change and to deliver nationally determined commitments by 2030.
And on that note, I'm afraid we are out of time. My thanks to my guest tonight, Jayantha Wijesinghe. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Narayan.
And don't go away because the People's Platform will be back tomorrow at the same time. Thank you for watching. Good night.